أهلا بكل الذين ينضموا للاستماع إلى راديو بلدي أول راديو عربي أمريكي ويعنى بقضايا العرب في المهجر. برامجنا في راديو بلدي كل يوم جمعة من 8 وحتى 9 صباحا مع ليلى الحسيني في بث حي ومباشر عبر WNZK راديو 690 AM. صباح الخير بلدي، صباح الخير لكل مستمعينا.
Welcome to Radio Baladi, the first Arab, Middle Eastern, and American simulcast radio show. Radio Baladi is broadcast every Friday morning on WNZK 690 AM from 8 until 9 Eastern Time on Good Morning Michigan with Layla Al-Husseini. Our call-in number 248-557-3300. And now, stay tuned for the best radio talk show on Arab and American issues with your host, Layla Al-Husseini.
I am Atef Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM. Good morning. I'm Atef Gawad reporting from Washington. On Sunday, Egypt will have president number 4 in as many years. Former Defense Minister Abdel Fattah Sisi won by a landslide, but the turnout was 47%, much less than the 40 million he had hoped for. Mr. Sisi is the 5th general to rule Egypt since 1952. The challenges he faces are enormous. The economy is creaking and security is fragile. Freedoms are giving way to demands for stability. The Egyptians say they are tired after 3 years of turmoil since they toppled Hosni Mubarak. They long for normality even as they suffer from poverty, unemployment, lack of education, and health care. One big question is whether the so-called Arab Spring is producing dictators through the ballot box. In Syria, Bashar al-Assad is winning a third 7-year term in the midst of civil war. And in Iraq, Libya, Lebanon, and Tunisia, murky democratic practices are producing chaos and violence. To discuss these and other questions, we have with us Dr. David Ottaway, senior scholar at the Wilson Center and a 35-year correspondent and editor with the Washington Post. Dr. Samia Harris, an Egyptian activist and co-founder of the Egyptian-American Alliance. And joining us from Istanbul, Turkey, Mr. Wael Sawah, editor-in-chief of the Syrian Observer. Before we start our discussion, please feel free to call us with questions or comments. The number to call is 248-557-3300. That's 248-557-3300. Let's start our discussion. Dr. Ottaway, does Mr. Sisi's presidency mean the democratic transition in Egypt has been aborted?
Well, I think it's perhaps too early to come to that conclusion, although there certainly are fears that it has indeed come to an end. But we need to wait and see how he's going to handle the forthcoming parliamentary elections and give him a little time, see how he's going to deal with the problem of if you want to say the residual problems from the Arab Spring, which is a very strong tendency for Egyptians to take to the street when they're not happy.
I guess that's the only thing they can do. Dr. Harris, I want to ask you the same question.
Right, good morning.
Good morning.
I think it's work in progress, it's revolution in progress. My bet is always on the Egyptian people, not the governing board. I think there are a lot of eye-watching from inside as well as outside governments and people. So the outside, he's getting strong messages from abroad, from the U.S. Letter yesterday that's asking for transparency and accountability. From the King of Saudi Arabia is asking him to be careful of who he hires around him and to mind all components of the Egyptians and bring everybody to the fold. And here certainly the Egyptian Americans are sending strong messages to President Obama, being citizens, that they are not happy with an open support to the government. So there's a lot that's going on, and I think if President now, Sisi, if he wants to succeed, he is going to have to give up a lot of his power and his dreams. It's not an empire. It's a republic. People want democracy. People want to practice their rights, and they want the aspiration that they have put, freedom, right to work, and social justice are not going to die with any president. They are going to stay alive in the hearts and minds of the 90 million Egyptians plus the other million abroad. So is he going to deliver? Is he going to give up the ironclad power? Is he going to bring in civilian government, or is he going to count on his own SCAF colleague and members of the military board? It's really the ball is in his court and his team. If he is smart enough, I don't know, politically, then he will bring it to the civilian people with civilian government, and he will take serious positions immediately towards the goals of the revolution, towards bringing everybody to the fold. If he doesn't do that, he is not going to have enough presence to shut people up and bring fear. It's not going to happen anymore. It's not going to work with the Egyptians anymore. He has to bring true democracy, which the people fought for. So many have died, so many have been killed, so many are in prison right now. He just can't do that. He can't keep doing that. So he has to give up a lot to share the power and to go towards a democratic route.
We'll talk about what General Sisi has said about democracy in a moment. But Mr. Sawah, some people say the recent developments in Egypt have, in fact, emboldened Mr. Assad in Syria.
Well, yes, indeed. I would agree with you that what happened in Egypt has given some courage and a push to President Bashar al-Assad in Syria, because he used that as an indication that the people who took to the streets in January took to the streets again in order to revoke what they achieved during the revolution months, and he used that definitely in order to promote his image as a guardian of secularism and as a protector of the minorities, and to produce himself or to present himself as the symbol of stability in the country. But all the same, I don't think this will succeed, neither inside Syria nor outside Syria.
Dr. Ottaway, what is the main challenge for Mr. Sisi in domestic policy and that in foreign policy?
Well, domestic policy that he's got a ton of problems: economic, political, terrorism. It's not a job anybody would want to take, to tell you the truth. He's got to, in order to revive the economy, he's got to revive tourism. And in order to revive tourism, he's got to put an end to a tax on tourists, such as took place in February or March this year in the Sinai on a group busload of South Korean tourists. And after that, the revenues from tourism just plummeted. So he's got to deal with a number of problems simultaneously and domestically. And when it comes to foreign policy, I think at the top of the list, I'd put a very complicated and uncertain relationship with the United States. This is going to be difficult for him to manage, and it's going to be difficult for Obama to manage, because if it's not if we don't see democratic elections for the parliament that are forthcoming very shortly, Congress is going to continue to insist that U.S. military and economic aid from Egypt be suspended. So I think that's going to be a really difficult issue for him in foreign policy in the coming months.
But any U.S. pressure, specifically from Congress, might push Mr. Sisi to go to Moscow, and that would be reminiscent of how Gamal Abdel Nasser did in the 50s and 60s.
Indeed, that is a possibility, and of course there has been they've been negotiating for $2 to $3 billion of purchase of Russian arms. I don't know whether the Saudis and the United Arab Emirates is going to put up the money for buying military equipment when the country is facing such huge economic problems. But that's certainly a possibility. Nonetheless, it's not going to solve his economic problems to go running off and buying $3 billion of arms from Russia. So I don't call it a threat, but the option of going to buy a lot of arms now in the midst of an economic crisis I do not think would gain him great popularity on the streets of Cairo.
Dr. Harris, do you before I ask you this question, let's see, we have a caller, so let's take the caller. Please introduce yourself and go ahead.
Dr. Atef Gawad, good morning to you, sir, and good morning to your distinguished guests who are with you. Good morning to everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you. Najib Habba with you, Dr. Atef. Thank you for taking my call. I want to say Marshal Field General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, as a former defense minister, was able to save Egypt not through a coup, but just to remove the elected president, Dr. Mohammed Morsi. And then he called the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. But my bigger question here to you and to all the honorable guests is, do you think the history will repeat itself that one day somebody sympathized with the Muslim Brotherhood from the Egyptian army and will side with them to lead a coup to remove the current elected president, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi? And thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Harris, would you like to respond?
Sure, I would. I think really President Sisi now, he has come to power with a very, very thin win, which he should understand, meaning that the Egyptians are not happy with the status quo. They are watching so closely, even those who supported him. The percentage was very low. I don't think it's 47 like they have declared, but okay. So he knows he is very watched closely. Now, calling the Muslim Brotherhood terrorist group is not going to solve Egypt's problems. He cannot build enough jails for 9 million either Muslim Brotherhood or supporters, those supporters or sympathizers. He just cannot call everybody who is calling for freedom to be a terrorist. He has to weigh in what the Egyptian people want. Could he be toppled? Of course. He toppled others, and he could be removed very easily with the power of the people. It's a situation we don't want to bring the military. The military is owned by the Egyptian people, not by El-Sisi and SCAF, and everybody should know that. So whether Mr. Sisi is going to be practical enough, smart enough to bring everybody to the fold, he has to give up a lot of his dreams and power. The Muslim Brotherhood have to come to conclusion that Egypt first and above all, that it's time for nation building, and they can't create violence in the street. And even the liberals have to understand that Egypt comes first and above all. So I think that the three triangle, as I call it, have to come together to the fold to give up a lot to gain one thing, Egypt first and more important than everybody else's dreams. So can he stay, can he go? It's going to depend on his action, not just from today. Unfortunately, he has really blood in his hand from July 3rd, the way they have acted in the street. So, he's been very watched closely, inside and out. And he has to be practical and aggressive on how he is going to deal with all these files in front of his desk. How is he going to deal with all these issues?
We will be back after the break.
Dr. Al-Zuhaili specializes in diabetes and endocrinology and has been conducting research for over 12 years. Right now, there are several clinical studies actively enrolling for both adult and pediatric patients with type 2 diabetes. Under Dr. Al-Zuhaili's care, participants in the clinical research trials receive free lab work, medical procedures, medical supplies, and medications to assist in their treatment. Qualified participants are also compensated for their time and travel in addition to receiving top care for their diabetes treatment and control. The research department is equipped with experienced and friendly staff who will work to manage patient care and schedule accommodations. Please contact Al-Zuhaili Medical Consultants at 1331 Monroe Street in Dearborn. Visit alzuhailidiabetes.com and call 313-581-8903. 313-581-8903.
المحامي ستيفن لجانا المحامي القدير في الهجرة والتجنس يعلن افتتاحه لمكتبه الواقع في مدينة ديربون وتماما على 5300 شيفر رود. المحامي لجانا لديه خبرة طويلة في قضايا الهجرة والتجنس، قضايا الترحيل، يتعامل أيضا مع قضايا اللجوء من داخل وخارج الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية وأيضا جميع أنواع الفيز. المحامي لجانا لديه مكاتب منتشرة في العديد من الولايات الأمريكية، بوسطن، نيويورك، واشنطن وميشيغان. لجميع استفساراتكم القانونية اتصلوا بالمحامي لجانا على الرقم 313-945-0022 313-945-0022. جميع الاستشارات مجانية لمستمعي صباح الخير ميشيغان.
Atef Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNVK 690 AM and WVMV 700 AM. Welcome back to our discussion of the elections in Egypt and in Syria with Dr. David Ottaway, senior scholar at the Wilson Center and a 35-year correspondent and editor with the Washington Post, Dr. Samia Harris, an Egyptian activist and co-founder of the Egyptian-American Alliance, and joining us from Istanbul, Turkey, Mr. Wael Sawah, editor-in-chief of the Syrian Observer. And again, I would like to remind you that you can call in with questions or comments. The number to call is 248-557-3300. That's 248-557-3300. Mr. Sawah, some Syrians believe that a dictator like Mr. Assad is far better than the extremists who seek to remove him.
Well, this is really an irony, Dr. Abdul-Jawad. First of all, we should remember that Assad himself created these extremists who he is trying to scare people from. And secondly, we should remember also that when the Syrian people took to the streets, they were not armed for months and months, and the regime itself just pushed the Syrian people, the peaceful people, in order to take up arms and defend themselves in the beginning. Number three, it is the regime which opened the borders when the opposition was not yet in control of the borders. It was the regime that opened the borders for foreigner fighters and extremists to pour into the country. Number four, it is the regime who is himself, itself, calling on Hezbollah fighters and Al-Haras Thawri, the Revolutionary Guard in Iran, and fighters from Iraq to come and fight to support the regime. So the regime created all this situation, and now he is trying to put us in the situation where people should compare and choose either him or the extremists. The Syrian people, frankly and openly, refuse both cases. They refuse the dictatorship of President Assad and his regime, and they refuse the foreign fighters who do not represent the Syrian. And they still, the majority of the Syrian people still call for democracy and an open society where all components of the Syrian society coexist together, live together in a civil democratic state.
Dr. Ottaway, some people say, back to Mr. Sisi now in Egypt, that Mr. Sisi is an extension of the Mubarak regime. Do you think he is?
Well, no, I don't. I think, we don't know what his economic policies are going to be yet. But there are signs that it may go back to being more statist, more the government trying to drive the economic process rather than the private sector. So I think we're going to see a slightly different emphasis in how Egypt goes about economic development. Whether it's going to be successful is another issue. But I think that's going to be different from... I don't think we're going to see kind of crony capitalism we saw under Mubarak. Precisely because we saw it under Mubarak, El-Sisi is going to be more careful about that sort of arrangement between the private sector and the presidency, particularly when you have Mubarak and his two sons on trial, continually on trial for corruption and embezzling state money, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't think we're going to see that repetition of that right away. On the political side, I think it's an open question. You know, they're not encouraging the new electoral law does not encourage parties. 80% of the districts are going to be, the elections are going to be individual, not parties. So only 20% of the districts where the parties can run. So that doesn't help strengthen or revive the party system. It tends to push Egypt back to kind of the National Democratic Party that depended so much on local chiefs and tribes people and elders, and so we may have sort of a slight change, but not much in the nature of political representation in the forthcoming elections. Pretty much what we saw under Mubarak.
But is it possible, do you think, that the next election, the next parliament, may in fact include some so-called moderate Muslim Brotherhood members as a token presence in the parliament?
I think there'll be very few. Muslim Brotherhood is going to boycott the elections. You'll have some Salafis in it, and you know, you have a Noor party, the Salafi party, that won 24% of the vote in the last parliamentary elections. So you'll have some religious Salafi representation, but I don't think we're going to have Muslim Brotherhood representation.
Dr. Harris, Mr. Sisi has said in several interviews, don't expect democracy before some 25 years. Are you willing to wait that long?
No, actually, that reminds me of President Kennedy when he said those who make peaceful revolutions impossible make violent revolutions inevitable. So if Mr. Sisi says that there's no time for democracy, he definitely is calling for the violent revolution to take place of the peaceful revolution that the Egyptian people have done on January 25th to 11. So the people have awakened. You have awakened a giant line in Egypt, the 90 million plus. They are not going to wait for 25 years. Most of revolutions, you have the French Revolution lasted for 9 years, and they got what they wanted, and the others in the world. So the people are not going to wait for an ironclad government. No, for somebody who tells them cut the piece of bread into four. Where do you want me to get it from? At the same time, fixing his palace to be with $20 million or so, it's not going to be swallowed by the Egyptian people in the street who can't feed their kid, educate their kid, or take them to a decent hospital, and who also are worried about the water Nile file. So many problems to have. Is he going to tune in to build a nation that's fair for every Egyptian? Is he going to put a tax system, an economic system that is curbing the corruption, stopping the corruption, and almost like really organizing it from the top to the bottom? So this trickle-down economic policy that Mubarak has used and failed miserably cannot be practiced again. There are so many files he has to take care of, and it has to be totally different from what Mubarak has done and what is going on currently. They have to deal with the issues seriously, build the nation right from the beginning with all its components. And that is either he's going to stay or he's going to end the same way as now the two presidents are in prison. You know, so people are not going to fear. They are going to act with what is good for them and their children. Right now, it is horrible. It is horrible. Security-wise, the kids are being killed, the kids are being kidnapped in the street. My Dr. Ottaway said that he cannot sustain the security as it is. The tourism has tanked, and now it's been marked as the worst tourism place in the world, and it takes 1/6% of the economy in Egypt. So here's 1/6 gone. What else can he do? He has to really, really rebuild all components of the society, inside and out, bottom to top, top to bottom.
We'll be back after the break.
Betsy's Bridal and Formal, Michigan's largest selection of special occasion dresses. Exclusive bridal and cocktail fashions for formal engagements, proms, showers, pageants, mother of the bride and groom, and full bridal wear. Sizes 6 through 30. Betsy's has over 33 years in the bridal business. We promise you the best quality service and alterations. Betsy's Bridal and Formal is located at 6189 Haggerty Road in West Bloomfield. Call 248-669-9999. That's 248-669-9999.
New Concept Product and Design، رائدة إعداد وتجهيز المطاعم والمطابخ بالمعدات بشكل كامل. غرف التبريد والثلاجات. يمكننا مساعدتكم في الحصول على التمويل اللازم لمشروعكم، وكذا الحصول على الإجازات اللازمة من الدوائر الصحية. نخدمكم بخبرة 25 عاما. ناجي عبود صديقكم الدائم. للاتصال الهاتف رقم 248-442-9292 248-442-9292 وتماما على 33900 West 8 Mile Farmington Hills. للمزيد من التفاصيل زيارة الموقع الإلكتروني www.nuconceptproducts.com.
I am Atef Abdel-Jawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNVK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM. Welcome back to our discussion of the Egyptian and Syrian elections with Dr. David Ottaway, senior scholar at the Wilson Center and a 35-year correspondent and editor with the Washington Post. Dr. Samia Harris, an Egyptian activist and co-founder of the Egyptian-American Alliance. And with us from Istanbul, Turkey, Mr. Wael Sawah, editor-in-chief of the Syrian Observer. I would like to remind everybody that you are free to call us with questions or comments. The number to call is 248-557-3300. That's 248-557-3300. Mr. Sawah, Saudi Arabia supports Mr. Sisi, but is fighting Mr. Assad, who is fighting Islamists, more extremists than the Muslim Brotherhood. Explain to us why.
Well, yeah, of course, on the first hand, there is the game that is going place between Saudi Arabia and Qatar. We know all that Qatar supported the Muslim Brothers and former President Morsi, and Saudi Arabia took the other side and supported changing that situation. As for Syria, I think President Bashar al-Assad has managed to be the best person on earth in creating enemies to himself. And there is a history of hostility which Assad treated Saudi Arabia and most of the Arab countries with. And you remember in 2007 when 2006, I think, when Assad called King Abdullah and most of the Arab leaders half men. This is number one. Number two, the situation in Syria cannot be compared with the situation in Egypt. In Egypt, we are talking about hundreds of victims in a country that has 4 or 5 times more population than Syria has. In Syria, we are talking now about more than 200,000 victims who lost their lives because of the bombing of the barrels and using the chemical weapons and dying under torture in prison. We are talking about 4 million refugees. We are talking about as many people who are displaced from their.
It looks like we have lost Mr. Sawah from Turkey. If that's the case, then Dr. Ottaway, Saudi Arabia sheltered the Muslim Brotherhood during the Nasser era, and yet it supported their removal from power last year. Why is that?
Well, there are historic reasons. I mean, you've begun to mention them. The fact that the Saudis took in thousands and thousands of Muslim brethren that were fleeing Egypt after Nasser cracked down on the Muslim Brotherhood. And so they sheltered them for decades. And then when it came to the first Gulf War, 1990-91, the Brotherhood decided to take the side of Saddam Hussein rather than the Saudi side. And this really made the Saudis very mad, and they felt they'd been betrayed by the Muslim Brotherhood, whom they had protected for so long. And so there's a deep bitterness, a Saudi bitterness about the Muslim Brotherhood and how they behaved in the past towards starting in 1990, the first Gulf War. And then they blame the Muslim Brotherhood for bringing political Islam to their own particular brand, Wahhabism, if you want to call it, and politicizing Islam inside the kingdom. Because a lot of the Muslim Brotherhood refugees went into the education system, became very important to the education system, and sort of spread notions of political Islam inside the kingdom. And the former Interior Minister, Prince Nayef, once said not too long before he died, all our problems came from the Muslim Brotherhood. Well, that may be true or not true, but anyway, that's the attitude, the Saudi attitude towards the Muslim Brotherhood, and it continues to this day. And they were worried about what the Muslim Brotherhood under Morsi. Morsi had sort of begun an opening to Iran, which is Saudi Arabia's main political rival in the Gulf and in the Levant. And so there were all kinds of reasons for which the Saudis actually helped to overthrow Morsi.
Let's have our caller from New York. Please introduce yourself and go ahead. Hello, go ahead, sir.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead. Introduce yourself, please.
Hello, Mr. Ahmed, you're on. Please, go ahead.
Is it talking in English or Arabic?
In English, sir. Go ahead, please.
And what the topic is, because I haven't followed the topic. I was told about the election in Egypt or about Muslim Brotherhood.
Well, whatever issue you have.
I think I was quite ready for what's happening recently in Egypt, being an Egyptian and living here. Most of the Egyptians living in the States and in New York particularly felt so happy with the result of the election and having Marshal Sisi to rule the country. We have been suffering for the last 3 years and particularly for 1 year of mercy of Muslim Brotherhood. So we're hoping for the best for Egypt, especially the economy is so badly affected, the tourism. So we pray to God that things will get better. And for tomorrow, Saturday and Sunday, there is so many Egyptians will gather to celebrate the winning of Marshal Sisi, the new president for Egypt, that will take place in the United Nations Square in Manhattan, and some of them will be in front of the Egyptian embassy in Washington, D.C. So we are very glad of what's happening as a new thing to the Egyptians, and we hope for the best. That's my contribution today.
Thank you very much. Dr. Harris, the gentleman mentioned the Muslim Brotherhood and how he and many Egyptians were not happy with the way they conducted themselves under Morsi. What do you think the main problem with the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt under Morsi?
Well, Muslim...
Actually, it's a very important question, and to answer it particularly, everybody will have a view. But as a very simple Egyptian street man can tell you exactly the feeling after the fall of Mubarak and the rise or the coming up of Muslim Brotherhood. Usually people in the street, they consider them as the people they have very strong impact to the people. You know, we were not having a good parties to represent the Egyptian. It was only the national part, which it was only ruled by the Mubarak, with no other party in Egypt to represent the social life. So the Muslim Brotherhood, they were doing well to reach the poor areas. So they were having a strong touch with the people. They're giving them different commodities, different assistance. So they were known to the simple Egyptian people that Muslim Brotherhood are good people. When it comes to politics, it was different because they've been under the sun for 8 years. All of a sudden, they came up to the sun. It seems like somebody, you give him a long time, has no food, he is thirsty. When you give him the chance, it is uncontrollable. So what happened within the first year, and luckily it was only 1 year, that they misunderstood the political game. So there are so many imams, I know them, they are good Muslims, but they are not Muslim Brotherhood. So they describe what happened, that the Muslim Brotherhood, they were so stupid in the political. And that's why the crisis happened for 1 year. And luckily, it was only 1 year. And in that 1 year, we as an Egyptian understood that it cannot be anymore. And for them, they still felt that they were stupid. And the first statement, President Morsi said that we came here to rule the country for 500 years coming. So that means there is no any chance to say that there is a democracy is coming on. I think there is a fatal mistake. And logically, if you hire a company or if you hire a manager to do business for you and he was not successful, simply you can say to him, thank you so much, you cannot continue. So the Egyptian 90 million, after 1 year, they said, thank you so much. I hope the message already reached them. But again, to be honest, it is not advisable to cancel them all from your social life and political life. Somehow they are not all of them bad. The second generation, the people they are educated, I think somehow with the new ruler of Egypt, they have to consider that they're supposed to have a chance to share their ideas, especially when they got the message. I hope you agree with me.
Thank you, sir. We will have a comment from Dr. Harris in a moment, but after the break.
Ziyad brand. Quality products from our family to yours. Ziyad Brothers Importing offers the finest quality products, including brands like Sultan, Kraft, Nestle, Hook, Rico Picon, Dana, and many more. Ask your retailer to carry these fine products because you deserve the very best. For more information, visit our website at www.ziyad.com. That's www.ziyad.com. Ziyad, quality products from our family to yours.
If you get into a car accident, how will you pick up the pieces when you can't work, when the bills pile up? Who will help you? Call 866-YOUR-RIGHTS.
I called Jumana. She took care of everything. My medical bill, lost wages, and even a large settlement.
I am Jumana Kiruz, and I assure you that my team will not stop until you get the most for your rights.
If you've been in a car accident, call Jumana. 866-YOUR-RIGHTS.
مؤسسة الحياة للإغاثة والتنمية في مدينة ساوثفيلد في ولاية ميشيغان، المؤسسة الرائدة في العمل الإغاثي والإنساني. مؤسسة الحياة ومنذ 20 سنة تقدم العون للفقراء والمحتاجين والمتضررين بسبب الكوارث الطبيعية أو الحروب في شتى أنحاء العالم. كما تقوم مؤسسة الحياة بكفالة الأيتام والعوائل الفقيرة وحفر آبار المياه في مناطق الحاجة، وأيضا تقوم مؤسسة الحياة بتزويد المشافي والمستوصفات الصحية بالأدوية والمعدات الطبية وإنشاء مدارس وعيادات طبية في أقطار عديدة من العالم. ومؤسسة الحياة مرخصة للعمل في الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية، وجميع التبرعات معافاة من الضرائب. اتصلوا بمؤسسة الحياة للإغاثة والتنمية على رقم الهاتف المجاني 1-800-827-3543 أو زوروا موقعهم الإلكتروني على www.lifeusa.org.
I am Atef Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNVK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM. Welcome back to our discussion of recent elections in Egypt and in Syria with Dr. David Ottaway. Dr. David Ottaway is a senior scholar at the Wilson Center and a 35-year correspondent and editor with the Washington Post. Dr. Samia Harris, an Egyptian activist and co-founder of the Egyptian American Alliance, and from Istanbul, Turkey, Mr. Wael Sawah, editor-in-chief of the Syrian Observer. Now, Dr. Harris, would you like to comment on what the gentleman, the caller who just spoke a minute ago before the break, but basically, what do you think was the most serious or major blunder of former President Morsi?
Right. Well, first, actually, what's built on wrong ends up wrong. So the Muslim Brotherhood went into the presidency by wrong measures all around, legal and social and so forth. Then we had the wrong president at the wrong time, character-wise, social-wise, skill-wise, political awareness, all was just not in the man. Then the governing body, the Muslim Brotherhood, have no experience whatsoever in the governing system that they were trying to implement on Egypt at this time. They were not inclusive. They tried to systemize all the country with their own way of thinking, and if you are not with us, you are an enemy, sort of a thing. Their ambition was way above the tolerance of the Egyptian street. They are good, the Muslim Brotherhood are good in working with small social projects on the countryside that they can reach out, just like the church does. So they both are good in fixing somewhat limited problems, not an Egypt-sized problem. The other part is, Egypt and the Egyptians have lived together for 7,000 years. The Copts, the Nubians, the farmers, and recently from Nasser's days, the Nasserists, the liberals, and so forth. You can't bring a governing body that's going to say none of this will exist or will have rights anymore unless you are part of the Muslim Brotherhood. So it all went wrong from there on. And his biggest mistake, Morsi's biggest mistake, was not to listen to the people or the true advisors who said, you are not going to sustain. They thought they had the power, and they thought they are going to force their will on the Egyptian people. But again, you are on a revolution mode. That means you either are going to be a part of the revolution, implement the will of the Egyptian, or you're going to be out of the picture. And I do hope Sisi and his governing body will get that message. Otherwise, we're just going to keep going till the people get what they want. That's what revolution is. It's going to win. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of how many are going to die or be killed in the process by the time the people get the country they want.
Dr. Wael Sawah, if you are back with us, welcome back after the technical interruption. I know that in Turkey you have probably internet problems right now. But
we have a bad weather, actually, yes.
Good. Listen, what do you think the U.S. should do now that Mr. Assad is staying in power by a popular vote?
Well, first of all, let's define what popular vote is. Half of the Syrian population are not in their hometowns, and they are not capable of voting physically and geographically, and the other half are under the direct control and pressure of the Syrian security agencies and the Syrian army and the Syrian government under Bashar al-Assad. So I wouldn't exactly describe this as a popular vote. I will describe some described it, including the Mr. Kerry, as a farce. I even don't describe it as a farce. I describe it as a tragedy. This is number two. What the United States can do now. Actually, the question should be what the United States should have done years ago. We in Syria deeply feel that the United States has let us down, while it played a vital role in almost every other place, like in Tunisia and Egypt, and even in Yemen, and of course in Libya. It just left us alone fighting against this brutal dictatorship. And on the other hand, the brutal Islamist radical Takfiri groups. The United States should have, from the very beginning, intervened in a different way. Could it political way? Could it be military way? I don't, of course, call for military intervention that makes the American young chaps put foot on the ground. But there has always been other ways to intervene in Syria. Now, what the United States can do there are two things that should go hand in hand together. The United States must make it clear that there is no way for Assad and Assad family and the elite that surrounds him to remain in power. There is no way. This should be clear for everybody. The Syrian people cannot accept that. Some of the Syrian people might accept a compromise with the regime, with some parties in the regime that were not involved in killing the people, and they accept a transitional government that leads the transition towards democracy in Syria, but definitely not with Assad. This is number one. But number two, I believe that the United States needs to change its attitude with Russia. I still believe that the United States treats Russia with some inequality, let me say. While we can see clearly that Russia still plays a basic role and it has the upper hand in Syria. I believe there must be a role, there must be a way that the Russian government and the American government come to a conclusion to make all the parties in Syria pressuring also the regional powers, especially Saudi Arabia, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, and Turkey, in order to everybody behave positively in order to reach a political solution in the area. Arming the moderate opposition could be one solution, but it cannot be the solution. If we just give army to the fighters in Syria, we will not reach anywhere. We could play the game of arming the moderate fighters in Syria, but this is only a part of the bigger process, which should include basically the United States government and the Russian government.
Dr. Ottaway, General Sisi, or President-elect Sisi, says that there is a need to improve relations with Iran. How would that complicate his relationship with Saudi Arabia?
Well, that's a very good question. It would seem to be, totally the two going in opposite directions. On the other hand, Iran and Saudi Arabia are moving towards a dialogue themselves, and so it depends what Sisi intends to do in dealing with Iran. The United States is trying to improve its relations with Iran too. So you can't really blame Field Marshal Sisi from thinking, well, maybe this is something we should do too. So he's going to have to be careful, though, not to alienate the Saudis and the Emiratis, the United Arab Emirates, on this, because they have become his main financial backer. So it's going to be a difficult issue for him to deal with.
Thank you, Dr. David Ottaway, Senior Scholar at the Wilson Center and a 35-year correspondent and editor with the Washington Post. Thanks to our other two guests, Dr. Samia Harris, an Egyptian activist and co-founder of the Egyptian-American Alliance. And from Istanbul, Turkey, thank you, Dr. Wael Sawah, Editor-in-Chief of the Syrian Observer. Atef
My pleasure.
Reporting from Washington, D.C.
Thank you so much.
I am Atef Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM.